First, I wanted to thank Fluffy and the Mystic Activity Center for allowing us to use this space. That's just a huge help. In terms of the support for the project, I think we will make a point of acknowledging City Councilor Jesse Klingon has been a huge advocate for this project. City Council in general, the Mayor's office has also been a huge supporter for the project, and we want to make sure we acknowledge their help and support, as well as the school administration, school superintendent Mary Skipper, Jeff Curley, the assistant superintendent, Ward 4 Representative Andre Green. Andre? We've also had some great support from the teachers and the staff at the Healey schools. I wanted to, make a point of thanking them. The new principal, Dr. Mary Ellen Cobbs, has been wonderful and very supportive. We've also had just good support from the Somerville Housing Authority. A lot of this project will actually be built on Somerville Housing Authority land, and they've been very cooperative and very supportive. And then lastly, the Friends of the Healey have been a huge advocate for this project. And if you are a part of that group, thank you for all your support and your advocacy. I think it's helped to push it forward. So in terms of the history of this project, just very briefly, this project was pushed forward with a CPA grant. People applied for funding for it, and they created the Healey Mystic Master Plan was the outcome of that. And that plan was created to sort of develop a master plan to unite the Healey Schoolyard, housing, and the surrounding area. And there was a strategy and a set of goals that came out of that meeting. And this project, which is the Healey Schoolyard project, is to find a way to meet those goals with a realistic plan. So this project is 3 components. It's the new design for the schoolyard, it's a U12 soccer field, and it's new connections between housing and the schoolyard. I think everybody knows there's an existing staircase there, so we'll talk about the plans to take that out and to put a ramp in its place. So, and I think that I just wanted people to know that this is our 3rd community meeting on this project. We had our first community meeting about last January. We had a meeting earlier this summer. We brought Warner Larson on board as a landscape architect. We've received a lot of community input. We've also had meetings with the Mystic Housing Picnic, Mystic Tenants Association. We went to the Healey Open House, and we met with a group of Healey teachers last week, which was incredibly helpful. We also, David will talk about it, but there was a community survey that we put out. We've received significant feedback from that, and all of these factors are having an influence on this design. So, I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself earlier. I'm Arn Franson, Director of Parks and Open Space for the city, and our design team is Warner Larson, and I'll introduce David Warner to take it from here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Arn. We are really thrilled to see the turnout tonight. We were worried a couple minutes ago, but thank you all for coming. We have about a 60-minute presentation, and I'm going to stop at a couple of points in there for clarifying questions. First, we're going to recap where we've been to date very briefly, and then show you a couple of different design solutions for the schoolyard, and then show you a range of play equipment type. And both of those things are things we want you to stick around towards after the first hour. We're going to put some boards up over here that have the opportunity to cast your vote, to show us what you like. So that's what the agenda in front of you is intended for. So hopefully all of you can stick around for an hour and be able to participate in that process. So first I want to introduce the rest of our team. Behind me over here is Samir Boite, and on my right is Andrew Lowe and Emily Hunt. And Antone Almeida couldn't join us tonight. He's been doing a lot of the 3D modeling. You're going to be able to see the actual design solutions that we're presenting to you. So first I want to just briefly touch on the timeline. And what you can see here, Arn kind of recapped a little bit already in terms of where we've come. But we did have this meeting in the summertime back on July 9th, and this is where we're at right now. We're looking at a two-phased project where the schoolyard would be constructed first, and we plan on moving forward with that as early as next summer. So just a show of hands, how many were here for the July meeting? Okay, so it's good to see a few people coming back to that. And so for those of you who weren't here, the recap that I'm going to go through will be helpful to set the stage for the design solutions. All right, so this is an existing conditions plan. We call it a site analysis diagram. And what it does is it shows you the primary elements on the site. Where this is the school building, this is Meacham Street over here. The housing is down below. This, of course, is the big hill. And most of the schoolyard is this big open paved area with some fencing around it divided into various courts, as you well know. The parking, the service area, and we do need to maintain access here to the back of the kitchen. This is your outdoor classroom space, and then the tot lot up in the west corner. So north is up in this direction over to this way, and south, of course, is down there. You've got the large single staircase over here, and you've got the switchbacking staircase with these terraces over here, okay? Oh, and of course, the MWRA head house at this point, at the lower terrace. So what we had concluded at the last meeting was how to program the site with the preferred design solution. And these are the three diagrams that we presented, and they basically took your existing program and the desired program and showed how those spaces could fit on the site. The one on the right is the one which we had voting process at the last meeting, and that was the one that had the most favorable votes. And so you're going to see two design solutions tonight that are based upon that program, like that configuration of the program, which basically has your basketball courts in the middle of this space. Here's the building, the service area. The MWRA head house is over here. And structured play area to the north. Your school garden, we're saying, remains where it is, but we could have an outdoor learning environment there. And then, the field space down below, which I will show in an updated plan. So Arne mentioned that we conducted a survey, and we actually had 133 results as of today or yesterday. This is very current, and we're really glad to have that level of participation. And also the fact that we had a really good representation of the stakeholders for this space. So between neighbors, parents, and teachers. So over here also were how some people, when they filled in the blank of where they're from or what their role is, this is a map of the different types of people who took the survey, how they characterize themselves. So as far as the survey results, we asked several questions, and I'm going to go through 4 slides that show you the primary outcomes from the survey. The full survey is something we're downloading as a compiled PDF. Now, the survey, I think, is being closed tomorrow. That PDF will be available. We'll find a way to make that available if anybody wants to drill down into any more detail. The existing conditions in terms of how the site is used, you can see here the top 5 uses for recess, playground equipment in the tot lot area, passive use, basketball, and being able to use scooters or bicycles in the play yard. But when we asked what you'd like to see in the schoolyard, that's where we saw a lot of the numbers jump. But still we had some major things kind of jump out that continued. Playground equipment, community events, passive use, school garden, the recess space, and outdoor learning. Those really are, of course, soccer, which is the field program you'll see in the plan, is an important part. We also heard, that multi-generational, that this needs to be a community space for all ages. It's really important. So, and then looking at the different types of play elements, this was a ranking outcome. So in the survey, people were asked to prioritize the different type of play that they could see happening in the schoolyard. And the top 5 here, as you can see, the 5 to 12 climber, because of course the structured play that we have out there right now is just for the very younger children. Natural play elements, having some climbing elements, like rock climbing or overhead bars, swing, and imaginative play spaces. So one of the questions we asked, in addition to a full-size multi-sport court, what is your interest in having another court, whether it was a half-size or full-size? And clearly having another full-size court, so we're working with two full-size basketball courts as part of the design solution. And then we heard there were a lot of other comments that were added to the survey, and this is a bit of a word cloud that incorporates those. And there are some overarching themes here. You know, clearly the fact that it's pretty much void of trees. It's a big open paved area, you know, and incorporating more spaces for the community, passive spaces, as well as making sure that it continues to work for the school as far as recess and outdoor play. There were, I think a lot of these things are synergistic and they will work well together in the design. So this is the overall plan. Again, same orientation as we had before, north up over here. And we're going to be focusing on these 4 primary areas as we drill down into more detailed plans. And they are looking first at the field and the ramp over here. And then we have the tot lot enlargements. We're going to zoom in on that. We want to show you what our thoughts are for making a strong, safe pedestrian connection from the school over to this staircase. And then we'll be showing you the 2 design solutions that we have at the schoolyard. So first, this is the field area. This is a U12 field, 210 foot by 135 feet with the overrun space. And it will require a retaining wall to be constructed partway down that existing slope, somewhere around 12 to 15 feet tall over here, and maybe about 22 to 25 feet tall over there. It's a significant construction. The size of this field is something that's very important to the youth soccer program in the city. We looked at a U10 versus a U12 field. This one is incrementally larger, of course, but that is the size of the field that's needed in order to support the citywide programs. The accessible route will require, and I'll zoom in on that on the next slide, I guess. If anybody has a question about a particular slide, you're welcome to ask it, but only like if it's a simple clarifying question. We'll have discussion later in the presentation. So on this end of the field, we have this accessible route coming down, and the access point currently coming up the concrete staircase comes in down here and comes out at this point. We are actually lowering the grade of the schoolyard in order to put that field in by several feet, and that's going to reduce the length at which we need to create an accessible route. This will all be constructed with ramps and stairs, so ramps that require handrails in order to minimize the travel distance for someone who may be in a wheelchair. And what we're also doing is we're creating these nodes at the turn points in the ramping system in order to have a resting place, because it is quite a long run. We are talking about eliminating the dumpster location here in order to be able to construct this ramp and moving the dumpster over here next to an existing one. The staircase is going to be connecting between the ramps so that people who can climb stairs will share the pathway along portions of the route to make it more inclusive. These images here are an example out in Andover, actually. There's a project that we're working on for a schoolyard up there where this is a ramp system that's been constructed. And this is very similar to what we're proposing here, so that these sections of ramp would just sit on the land. We would end up having to remove trees that are in this area to construct it, and then we would have some natural landscape restored in that area. So moving along to the tot lot area, this is that space, the existing rectangle that's now full of the engineered wood fiber. This past summer, the city has incorporated some additional smaller play elements, and they've upgraded the existing play structure to bring it into compliance and make it safe. And what we will be doing is replacing the surfacing there with a poured in place and potentially some rubber tiles. That's what we're showing here in color at these high wear zones at the bases of slides and things like that to add durability and also a fun design to it. We'd like to incorporate some landform, something like this, that brings out another element of play. And in this zone over here, there's an ability to incorporate more play panels and interactive play where you don't need safety surfacing around it. And on this far end, we're actually, the current fence comes in at an angle like this. We're bringing that out closer to the sidewalk to capture that space and free up the root system of that large tree a little bit, and put some of these elevated platforms around it. So there's passive seating space. We've got a little playhouse out there that could probably still stay there, and maybe some sitting stumps. But this is a little bit more of a natural character with the two large mature trees that could remain. These are examples of some of that smaller interactive play and play panels down here. So the connection from the main entrance of the school over to the top of the large staircase, we need to make safe and accessible. And so what we're doing is we're proposing putting an accessible curb ramp over here, coming over to the island with a curb ramp and sidewalk, bringing you to another curb ramp, and then of course you have your crosswalk over to this point. So what that's doing is it's providing a direct accessible route from the top of the stairs to the main entrance, which is going to be visible to anybody who's driving through there, and it'll be a safe place for children to cross. You've got your barrier gates that come across right here, and this walkway will not interfere with those. That's partly why this geometry, we ended up with this. We think there's an opportunity to do something fun, with the graphics, and so as part of a standard crosswalk, we could put something in there that, maybe represents the Healey Hawks or something like that. And then one of the last smaller areas before we get into the larger schoolyard is to talk about this outdoor classroom space. And this is your existing area right now that we think there's a lot of merit to its configuration and its location. We do want to make it accessible, and we want to make it more useful to the teachers. So towards that end, providing an accessible pathway with stone dust coming into the main space, that whole area would then be fully accessible, possibly adding a whiteboard, straightening out the stones that are there, and really providing a little bit more structure to the garden planters that are out there. Right now they're kind of low to the ground, and they could be raised up. This is an example of a project that we did over in Brighton. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Edison School, but this is an example of that. We could find a place to work in, maybe a work table too, could probably go in at this location. But this is a photograph of the gateway into your current outdoor classroom, and this is the condition of the space. We think that removing some of this overgrowth and having a little bit more of a maintained native landscape along that side will be something that it will support the educational program in the school. I've got these two plans up here. I'm going to go into the schoolyard design part of the presentation. We're going to present each of these separately and show you more detail of the components in them. I just wanted to start by explaining some of the distinctive differences between them. It's basically, like I pointed out earlier, the same program going in the same location. So it's much more of a experiential configuration. So the designs are different within the spaces where the program exists, if that makes sense. So we're calling this one the Hawk Hub, and this one the Mountain Meander, because we think it's characteristic of the experience in the play spaces. And so this is the play area on both of them, and this is where the two basketball courts are located. And then down by the field edge, we have this route that gets you down to the field, and in here we've got things like shelter and fitness. In this case, they're a little bit reversed, shelter and fitness. But as far as the play space is concerned, start with the Hawk Hub. Basically, you're coming in on an accessible path that rises up without any handrails. This is all done fully accessible. Both of these are fully accessible without the need for handrails. So it's sloped gently. You're coming up this pathway, and you're getting up to a point that's about 7 feet in elevation above the existing grade. And then you're coming back down to the existing grade. This is where you come out of the cafeteria doors right here. And so coming right out into the schoolyard. And what this does inside of this space is more of a bowl. And then this is an overlook. And you'll see that in more detail as we get into the design. This design over here, the Mountain Meander, has an accessible pathway, starts a little bit further away from the school, if you notice, and then it actually meanders more, and it creates these nooks and crannies, these smaller spots along the way where play elements could be located. And it rises up because of the length of the pathway. It's continually going up and up and up, as opposed to up to a point and back down. So by the time you get up here, you're higher. You're like 9 or 10 feet above the existing grade. And both of these will have side slopes that go down. And in this location, we have a wall component. And over here, we also have a wall component. So when we heard about climbing, like rock climbing, for instance, that's where we can have some of those rock climbing grips on there. It's also important to think about, the circulation through the play yard, and we have these loops that can carry you through. So as far as the scooters and the small tricycles and that sort of thing, cycling, there are these loops around. All right, so the playground elements that are common to both of these, we'll focus on that first, are the fact that we're incorporating a fitness area. We have landform, like I've touched on already. We have the multi-sport court and the athletic field, and then obviously a play structure. This is not the particular one that we're proposing, but play equipment for the 5 to 12-year-old age group, and of course basketball. We do have a wall ball in both of them, and we are incorporating landscape within the play space. So now I'm going to drill down into the detail on both of them. So just going down this list to describe the various elements, the accessible looping pathway, which I pointed out, and then there are ways to get up and down the slope besides just the sloping surface itself, but things like a boulder scramble. Climbing structure with the bridge connector. So, and you'll see these in 3D and they'll make sense. This is a plan view. I know that it's a little maybe hard to understand, but plan helps you understand things spatially, and then we'll show you things in 3D and you'll get to see what they look like. And an overlook with a climbing wall, I mentioned that earlier. And there's a shelter over here that has a stage element with outdoor seating, kind of this grove. One of the things about this design is that it does have, around the basketball court, some slopes as well. If this pathway is sloping up, of course, we've got a grade to get back down to the basketball court. So this is a sloped area, and then over here we have a sloped area. On this wall, we're also thinking this would be a great place to put something like a sculpture element or identity, maybe an H for the Healey. And then the trees, if you've noticed, we've incorporated trees throughout both of these designs. That's an important common element in these, but having some trees and some tiered seating, which is stepping up on one side and stepping back down on the other side. Those trees would be within a framed-in area, so they'd be protected. And then the shelter with stepped seating. So this is another shelter over here. This one is actually more of a pergola, more open shade structure. This is a roof shelter that we're proposing over here. The slope seating. So alongside of the synthetic turf field, we're looking here in this design about ramping that side of that field up in a slope with these blocks of stone or concrete that form ledges to sit on. It's not a formal bleacher, if you will, but it's more perches on the slope. And then the fitness area, and of course, painted graphics. Painted graphics are things that are going to be within the connected painted spaces, pavement spaces on both designs. So now we're going to look at what some of those elements could be. These are what we call inspiration photos. These are photographs of other projects that have similar items in them, and so it'll help you visualize what we're talking about. So a multi-use shelter is a solid roof providing protection from the rain, whereas a pergola would be more open air. If the asphalt is sloping alongside the basketball court on the north side, it's something where some of the pavement graphics could extend up that edge. The seating that slopes along the edge could be with synthetic turf. We also showing how the synthetic turf. Oh yeah, I should be pointing out where that is on the plan. So that's the slope seating next to the field. And then we have the shelter, step seating between that shelter and the field, and this is that tiered seating in this area. So back by the building, this is that solid roof shelter. Okay, so when you're within the play space itself, some of those areas around where this play structure is, as you come around on either side, can have this sloped condition. Picture a walkway along the top, and we could have that safety surfacing along the slope. The overlook element could be like this. Instead of being a deck, we're picturing it having a solid wall, and then could have some of the rock climbing elements on it. The play structure component, which we're going to get into in the next chapter of the presentation, is something not quite like this, but it sits up on the high part, and it could have the slides that come down. And then having around the back side of this, right around here, where we have a slope back down to the retaining wall, and there'd be a fence on top of that retaining wall, this area would be heavily planted and have more of a, a rock slope. The boulder scramble, as far as play, it wouldn't look quite like that, but we'd have some boulder scramble areas in here too to get up and down the play slope. So now these are the 3D model images that I mentioned earlier that we've been working on to help visualize this particular design for you. And this is standing down on the field, somewhere close to the middle of the side of the field, looking back towards the schoolyard, looking back towards the Healey. And what this shows is the pathway coming down the slope, crossing between a slope above and a slope below. This is the area where we're thinking, the synthetic turf could wrap up when we have those boulders or those rocks that sit on the slope to have informal seating. As you're getting up towards the top of the elevation of where the schoolyard is, this is a shelter that has the space underneath, which could have some tables and chairs and be a place for refreshments. A drinking fountain next to it for kids that are playing on the field. As you look towards the basketball courts, here's one basketball stanchion here. You can see, some outdoor fitness equipment. So this is that transition zone between the schoolyard and the field. And then taking another bird's eye view, I'll use the plan to orient you. I'm basically looking from this side over here towards the basketball courts, looking across the play space. And so what you can see here is this loop walkway coming around and going back down. And the high point up here is an overlook space. And you can get to this play structure on a bridge element, and then this play structure is elevated. And then the slide, which, because it's going to be lower to the ground, there's a slope underneath of it. It's not so elevated as you saw in the previous image. It can have windows, or it could be windows up above and then partially open on the lower part of it. Here's an actual overlook vantage point where the slope turns from where the elevated part turns from a slope to a rock climbing wall, which turns the corner around behind there. And this is looking out towards the basketball courts with that grove of trees down the middle, the wall ball, and then this is the sloped area with identity opportunity, something that signalizes the Healey. And here's a possible freestanding play element. These are basket swings, which allow for group and inclusive swinging. And this is just a transition in between the grove below by the basketball courts coming up through. The rock scramble that I think showed in the plan is something that's just below the view here. And then this is down within the space, looking back towards this overlook element, right? So this is the pathway that's going up and around and gets you up to that space, and then it will come back down on this side. And this is an area for one of the primary play structures, and we're going to get into showing you what those options are in a little bit, but showing how you can get up to the top and then connect out to this play structure and then slide back down or climb back down or continue on around. This is a vantage point that we think is pretty nice. Like I said before, this is about 7 feet higher than the existing grade that's out there. We're just trying to find ways to get up and appreciate some of the long distance views that are out there. So next I'm going to talk about the mountain meander, and this is the alternative site plan. And So remember what I said. This is starting at a point that's a little bit further into the play space, but then it continues sloping up along the entire length, and it winds around throughout this whole space and gets you up about 9 or 10 feet higher than the existing grade at this point, where that's where you have the opportunity to connect to that primary play structure via a bridge. So that's the pathway, winding pathway, and more of a nature play elements back here. We have boulder scrambles connecting the pathway in a couple of locations. We've got stepper, balance beam elements, and then pockets of planting that kind of, as you turn those corners. We are, I should have mentioned on the other option as well, but along this edge, wherever we have that slope I was talking about, we have some type of rail to kind of protect the kids from going down into those planted areas. The outdoor classroom extension, because overlook and bridge play, I already talked about that. The outdoor classroom extension. So this is the outdoor classroom we spoke about earlier, and being able to connect that out into the space as you're coming and going from the school, we thought that would have some potential benefit. This is a shaded picnic grove space where you could have a long bench and table type of seating. The zone between the courts here, a little different than the previous design where it's showing permeable paving, and there are some benches that kind of, this is in a staggered alternating pattern. And painted graphics, like we said, are something that's quite flexible, and there's an opportunity to develop those in many different ways. This is shown as something that could be used for physical fitness, and this is educational. The connectivity about looping through the campus we think is really important. All paved and connected, so kids that are on scooters or small bikes can get through. The fitness area over here and the shelter space over here are a little bit larger in that this play space is a little more compressed, and these basketball courts are a little further to the top of the sheet than the previous options. So those are distinctions. And the spectator seating here, you'll see in a 3D view, is more of a structured type of bleacher, which is built into the landscape with terraces, and you'll be able to see that more clearly in this view. So here we are down at the field elevation, and we're looking back up towards the schoolyard, and this structured seating adjacent to the shade shelter, or actually rain shelter in general. Basically you have this bleacher component which is intended to be constructed in these terraces with stairs and a handrail, and that these terraces could have the synthetic turf infill that's inlaid into the trays. The boulder elements, offer some informal seating. We definitely have a drinking fountain there. The fitness area you can see behind some of these trees. So whereas the other design pulled the green space down and brought some of the seating out over here more, this keeps the walkway a little further along by the field and transitions back up in a little shorter distance right there, so that this is the kind of primary seating area. So now we're way up high, looking back down at the play area. We're above the Healey School building roof, and this vantage point allows you to kind of get the overall feeling of the Mount Meander pathway. So coming in from where you come out of the cafeteria, out into this pathway, meandering around all the way, you're rising up to the point here, like I said, about 9 or 10 feet above existing grade. At this point, we're showing the grade held back with a wall that gives you an opportunity for climbing. And then these are a couple of the spaces on either side of the pathway as you wind through. These are little shortcuts or scrambles that connect between lower and upper parts of the pathway, and then the planting, densely planted around the edge, again, relatively steep to hold the grade, and we'd have that railing type condition to keep kids from getting down into those spaces. This is another view down at eye level as you're basically on the, a little bit on the farther side of the loop. You get to see some of the climbing wall element, the scramble between the lower and upper pathway, And then the intermediate spaces of steppers, balance over here. This is a small spinning element and some swings. That's the play structure, and behind these trees is a bridge connector. So you get to that high point, you have a bridge that connects over to that. And these are images of what we call them inspirational images that show you other projects that kind of incorporate elements that we have in this plan. So this is a winding pathway with some natural elements, and you can see some boulder scrambles here. This wasn't really intended for a playground, but it does graphically show you the type of character that that plan is striving for. And the pathway itself, in some places, might go under or through what's called the use zone around the play equipment, so we'll need rubber surfacing. Most of that pathway would probably be paved, but in this condition, you can see how the rubber surfacing that you need for accessibility and safety could be seamless and go through the pathway as well. These are examples of a climbing wall, boulder scramble, and then those terraces where you have the steps coming up through the bleacher, and these trays in between could be filled with that synthetic turf material that's down near the field. We wanted to get some input on this, and I suppose maybe when we get to the end of the presentation, we have discussion. We can do a show of hands or that sort of thing. But on this mountain meander plan, we do think that given the size of this shade structure, which is bigger than what's shown on the Hawk hub, that there's a choice. Basically, it's really interchangeable between the space that we're showing it in the renderings by the field and up by the building where we're showing the Shady Grove picnic table area. And in this plan, this is graphically showing the two of those switched. So we're going to come back to you later in the presentation, and after you've thought about that, that might be more something that's of interest to the school community itself, but we'd definitely like your input on that. So these are the two site plans that I just talked about and showed you the 3D views and the inspiration photos. I want to pause for just a moment to see if there are any clarifying questions. We're not going to get into discussion and compare and contrast at this point, but if there's anything I've shown you or told you that you're not clear on, I'd like to just hear from you. Thanks. Yes?
I'm just curious, you said the overlooks, they'll bring you up high enough so that you could actually see the river?
Well, you have quite a few trees that are on the embankment below, and a lot of those trees are deciduous. In the wintertime, you do get some nice clear views of them. So yes, I'm sure you're going to see, throughout the school year, you're going to see a lot more than you can today. But the vegetation that fills those up in the summertime, which we also want to try to preserve as much as we can as a buffer, is going to block views. These aren't going to get you to be completely above the trees. That's it's going to be a nice view in the wintertime when the leaves aren't on the trees, and it's going to also be this fun experience for the kids to just transform the space. Right now it's just so flat. Yeah. Yes?
What's the plan for this is the first meeting I've been to, what's the plan for that NBC head building that's right down the hill there?
State-owned property, there's nothing that we're proposing to change there.
From the overlook in the schoolyard, I know it's heavily wooded, but will there be a fence or something to keep balls from like rolling down the?
Yes, I mean, right now there's a 10-foot high fence that runs along the side. We will be replacing and upgrading, probably, well, I think the budget right now we've included replacement. And we know that ball control along the basketball courts is important. That fence, when it gets back here, I think we'll transition the height of it down, so it's probably a 4-foot or 6-foot high fence, just as a safety barrier. But we will definitely have a fence along the top of the wall. Any other clarifying questions?
Talk about any sustainability features that would be integral?
Yeah, so as far as the biggest one that comes to mind is the fact that we're opening up so much of the pavement to permeability. We have a really good geotechnical engineer in this project, McPhail Engineering, who was the engineer on the original construction of the Healey School building. And they're very knowledgeable about the soils underneath. And it's a lot of that soil on the top is a shale material that was excavated from the MWRA tunnel that goes under the site. I don't know how many of you know, but there's a tunnel about 400 and some odd feet, maybe 420 feet down underneath the ground. That's a water conduit. And that's what the building off to the side of the site, which doesn't show on these plans, is a head house for that. So that's how anybody who might need to ever access that tunnel could get to it. So permeability, certainly, and opening it up. Providing shade in order to reduce the heat island impact is going to be significant. In fact, some of the colors that we're selecting for the rubber surfacing, we've gone through all kinds of testing with those manufacturers to see which ones have a higher reflective index so that they can be cooler temperatures. And I'm just thinking, I know the city has an emphasis on pollinators, and by introducing more of the native plants and vegetation, we think that's also helping to serve that goal. What am I missing? There's probably a few other things too, but we aren't proposing any photovoltaics out here, things like that. We don't really have a lot of energy consumption. We are proposing lighting, of course, sports lighting on the field, and some safety and security lighting within the schoolyard. Did you have any other ideas relative to sustainability that I didn't touch on?
Just integration of rain garden or permeable pavers, if that was part of it.
Yeah, so we want to use those spaces, we're looking at opportunities for water to get to these trees, and along this edge over here. The grade basically slopes from the building out to this edge, roughly at 1.5% to 2%. So it's a really nice gradient to be able to intercept water if you have devices that run along perpendicular to that line. So these permeable pavers here, we see would be a great sponge for that, with structural soil underneath to support the trees. So we have good, healthy trees in a still urban environment.
You know, like talking about like 50 or so, at least 50 trees on it.
Yeah, it's transformative in terms of going from the open desert that's there now to the vegetation that we're anticipating.
Yes. During the soccer season, there's always the porta-johns that are out by all the soccer fields. Will there be an alternative, like a permanent structure for bathrooms, or is it just...
We aren't proposing any permanent toilet facilities, and I think that how the recreation department manages those leagues throughout the city will probably remain and be the same here. Yeah. So Emily is going to help me out a little bit with the playground equipment. Once we get through this chapter, we're going to stop and we're going to ask you to vote. So those of you who came in a little bit late, if you didn't each get one of these, just raise your hand and we can get you one. These are what we're going to do after we talk to you about play equipment, where we're going to ask you to use the pink dot to show us which preferred site design you like, the orange dot to show you what's your first choice of play equipment type, and those are going to be boards up here that you can walk up and put your stickers on, and then green would be your second choice for type of play equipment. The Post-it note is there, and be sure to grab a pen. Write any of your thoughts down about why you voted the way you did. All of the options, we are going to incorporate these types of play elements. Of course, you've already seen in some of the renderings the rubber surfacing and how the planting can be incorporated around the play space. The main structure may or may not look like this. We've got several options for you to look at and vote on, but we're looking at combining, finding a way to access the play structure at an upper level with a bridge element. That's something that I think we heard earlier on in one of the earlier meetings. We have quite a few different smaller play elements, and this is just one type. It's a web climber that goes up a slope. Have slides, they're either open or possibly have windows, and group swings. So the primary big play structure, we're looking at basically 3 different types, and this is how we've categorized them. And then after I describe these 3, then we're going to go to a slide that shows each one individually with various configurations of it, all right? Kind of a math problem. So the net bridge and lookout. You can see a net bridge here coming from that raised elevation that brings you over to a primary structure. In this case, it's pretty much an open web climber, but then there's a destination higher up that could provide a lookout element. The net and tower is, just as it sounds, a tower element, and it has various net components that get you up to it. And then there's the platform, tower, and bridge. So with this play structure, it's a little bit different, where you get up to a point where there's actually more of a deck space. And in this case, it has 2, and they are interconnected with various elements. There's your bridge. You have bridge elements in all of these, like I said. So now we'll just move forward into the net play and lookout. And so you can see the same net play and lookout element that I had in the previous slide right here. But that turret at the top there is something that could be done something like this. Could be more open. And that's something that we would like to do. We heard from the teachers, they like to have good visibility into the play spaces and through the play spaces. And you know, these are a few more details here, like a rope bridge. These rope bridges can come in all kinds of different configurations. This is simply more for walking across, but this type of a bridge element is something that kids can climb on from underneath, or up above, or in between, and it's a lot of fun. So, and this is something that's similar to that on a much larger scale, but down on the ground. So kids can get at it at the ground and climb through it. I think with this, you know, we'll find a way to fit that in a space that's kind of flat and open. So now the net and tower. You can see here the 3D view a little bit more clearly than in the image I showed before because it's kind of stretched out. This is actually an installation up in Lawrence, and I had the fun opportunity of climbing up there and taking that picture. But it's the same manufacturer. You can get up and inside of it. And so I guess what I'm saying is, you know, it doesn't have to be all closed in. It can be this open wire mesh type of thing. This is a completely different manufacturer and product. You can see it looks quite different, but it has a lot of the same functionality in terms of climbing up. Has a combination of web net elements as well as some more traditional deck and other play elements, decks, steps, and slides, and that sort of thing. This is a detailed view, just kind of looking at that with some kids in there. And then the platform and bridge and tower. This is, I think, it's the same structure that we showed in the original image, different view. But you can see how there's a wide range of ways of incorporating a bridge with a tower that has a platform in it. And so that's a distinguishing characteristic from the other elevated structures that I showed to you, how there's a platform here, but there's also one over in this structure. These are all variations of the same type of structure, as you can probably tell. This is actually a pretty good image of how it could fit into either one of the designs where you've got an elevated area, a slope next to it. You can come in on a platform and then have lots of different ways of getting down. When we're thinking about durability, when we're thinking about splinters, any concerns people might have with wood, usually it's durability and splinters and that kind of thing. I know that there are playgrounds in Somerville that are made out of wood, and that's a perfectly legitimate option. But this one, just in terms of the recycled component and the safety and durability of it, we wanted to recommend it. We thought this is actually a relatively new introduction, and we're pretty excited about it. So right now, Andrew and Emily are putting the boards up. In 10 minutes, so it's going to be pretty quick, I'm going to call us all back, and then we can talk about what we're seeing and any more specific discussion about the differences. All right? So this is free and open discussion. I have no restrictions as far as engagement other than we'd like to give everybody who wants a chance to speak a chance to speak. So, you know, if somebody continues to have most of the questions, we'll try to let everybody else speak as well. So let's start. Yeah. What have we got for numbers? 14 and 10. Okay. So what we're hearing is that this mountain meander had more votes. So who voted for that? And let's see a show of hands. Okay, great. Would any of you like to share with us what it was about that you like? Oh, yes.
The layout of the mountain meander just looks more, it catches your attention because the plants are scattered out more versus the hot cup where it looks like things are more centered in one area.
Fair enough. Yep, that's a distinction. Okay, so who voted for the hot cup? And who wants to tell us why they voted, what they liked about it?
So one of the things that I really liked about it is the vantage point for the teachers. Seems like it will be much easier for them to get a view of everything that's going on in the playground at once. Another thing I really liked about it was the flow. And I also just really liked the overall schoolyard concept where you have the picnic tables and the sheltered classroom right there. And then the slightly different transition over by the field.
Okay, so this is the shelter you're talking about here. So in looking at this option, you would prefer to have those switched if we were to...
Oh, actually, I didn't like the meandering one.
Right. No, I understand that. I'm just thinking about where we move forward with this. We could incorporate some of these elements from the different... Yeah, okay. Right, yes.
Could it be the structure from the hot cub incorporated into the mountain meander, that kind of stage that's not, it had a roof, but it wasn't enclosed?
Yeah. So what you're pointing out is this here being incorporated in this location or in this location?
Sorry, the question?
Yeah, no, that was the exact.
Oh, yeah, sorry,
But
that's the play structure.
Oh, the play structure. The shade structure. All right, got it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Did you have a preference in where that's located?
Probably closer to the school building.
Okay. Great. Other comments?
I like that idea.
Yeah. Okay. And having a stage or open space underneath of it? Okay, yeah, that's good. Does anybody want to speak about other details with either of the options as to things that you feel are really important or distinctions between the two? Yes?
I like the permeable surface between the two courts regardless of which design is picked. I think that'd be a good one to go with.
Okay. Yeah, great. That coupled with the structural soils, like I mentioned, would mean for better health for the trees. We don't have, a lot of the roadway runoff being in a schoolyard, so that should be healthy stormwater. Yes?
I think that about meander, it feels like you're using all of your space. It feels like it's very efficiently laid out. I also feel like I'm looking at less just sort of open surface of asphalt in that design as well.
Yep. Okay. Did you have your hand up? Okay. Yes.
So, what I liked about the hot cub is that a bunch of people at recess, they like to sit down right after they play sports. So I think the seating is better.
So we have seating and tables here. We've got these steps that could also be used for seating here. Is that some of the areas that you're thinking? Okay. And of course, the rock scramble element is something we have in both. I could see kids sitting on those as they're taking a little break from play as well.
David, which one had a higher elevation?
The mountain meander gets you up to about 9 or 10 feet at this point because the pathway is continuously going up. And the hawk hub is going up at the same gradient that this one is, but it gets to a high point here, about 7 feet higher, and then goes back down. So,
Yes.
Would there be room in the mountain meander to add a second swing structure?
you having two basket swings, you mean, side by side? Because that was one of the differences that I overheard someone saying over there. We'd have to take a look at that and see. The footprint of that is a little bit larger. This is actually a different swing configuration than this one, right? So it looks like something like that could possibly fit over here. We'd have to study that. But that's a strong preference in having two basket swings side by side.
The kids who stay after school, they're always fighting over the swings.
Okay. So one of the things, I showed a slide earlier that had the basket swings. Can people remember what that looked like? Okay. So that's where a bunch of kids can get in it at the same time. And it's also something that's considered accessible. So the more traditional belt swings that you see at a lot of playgrounds, oftentimes an accessible swing there is a molded plastic swing, and it's separate. and it tends to be more isolating for children with disabilities. And if you have a basket swing where a child who is less able can swing with the rest of their friends, then that's what inclusive design is about. So these basket swings are really a nice way of doing that. And having two side by side gives you more capacity. And it's probably the best way to do that if you're going to have more than one, because it would be the smallest footprint by having them on the same swing structure. That's good feedback. Thank you. Yes?
What happens in the driveway, what happens to the, currently you pull around, you sort of drive right to the basketball courts and pull back around. Does that stay the same, or is there?
I'm going to get back to that overall plan where I can show you that. Oh, here we go. All right. So this plan isn't quite fully rendered, but I will show you the current turnaround is back here somewhere, right?
Okay.
And we are making that shorter. We're losing about a dozen spaces here in doing that, because and the field is what's making that happen. Because of the U12 field down at this end, we just can't push it any further that way. So the reason why we were also stopping it here was because it works very well for the surface access to the back, where the dumpster is, where the kitchen loading is. Kitchen loading area. We have the place for emergency vehicles to get back. We have service vehicles and a dumpster, and there's some staff parking at this location that will remain.
So we won't lose many teacher spots? I mean, are you compromising some of the parking spaces? I mean, I'm fine with that, but the teachers still have ample parking?
So we have, through the city, we've met with the teachers with looking at these site plans. And I don't know, in terms of the specific feedback, I was not at that meeting. Andrew, Emily, you were at.
Yeah, we might have mentioned it, but we didn't dig into what the alternatives would be. But the fact is that it is a hard fact that we're probably eliminating 12 to 14 parking spaces in that parking lot.
And we did study alternatives where looking at the size of a field that could fit in here, for instance, which wouldn't have required the parking to be cut back. But that field wouldn't have been the size necessary. And it's really not the best location for the field. That's where the play structure really wants to be, outside of the cafeteria for the daily operation of recess and the school's needs. And so the U12 field, this is really the only location that it does fit on the site. And in holding this side as constant, this is where we end up. You're welcome. Okay, so I can go back to the slide that showed the two options side by side. Right. So if there aren't any more comments on these at the moment, we can obviously take more comments in a little bit, right before we wrap up. But does anybody want to talk about their votes on the play equipment? I don't know, Andrew, can you tell us kind of which ones were most favored?
Yeah, it kind of looks like the net bridge and tower was the winner in this option, with the bridge and tower, the platform bridge and tower coming in second.
So people talk about what they like about the play equipment,
What was the one?
what were the aspects of
No, the one.
what the aspects of that people like? Was it a bridge, or was it having a raised platform where people could, a group could be in, or was it just the circulation?
You commented about?
So for me, when I was looking, I stay after school with my kids a lot, and one of the things that's often a problem is getting kids to leave. And so I was thinking about, can a parent or a teacher climb up easily and help a child, or get a child off who doesn't want to leave? Because at some of the other playgrounds that have been built recently, it's really not easy to do that, so that's what I was looking at.
Which one did you vote for?
Oh gosh. We didn't put our names on them, I don't know. Whichever one didn't have rope ladders to get up to the equipment.
That one.
So maybe
Probably that one, yeah.
Oh, yes, sorry.
I just visually responded to I think you were saying is the new composite thing there with the square.
Mm-hmm.
I think that just looks beautiful.
How did that one get votes? It looks like 1, 2, 3, 4 For first place and 3.
So the bridge and tower have 10 orange and 8 green, and the net bridge and tower have 12 orange and 6 green. That's the 12 I'll go over.
Yeah, great, thank you. Excellent. Other thoughts on the play equipment? We're losing people,
I have a
so.
question. I know we're winding down, but, so we're talking about equipment in all the configurations, we're talking about a reasonably tall tower element. So that seems like that really is something that people in the community are looking for. It's going to give you that, place that vertical climbing element and the views. Do people have any hesitation about that type of a feature? Most of the other playgrounds in the city have like a lower, more of a horizontal oriented climbing structure. Do people have any, thoughts one way or the other? Okay.
I mean, Lincoln Park, my kids to just talk about how awesome it is that it can go up so high. They're really into that. And Winter Hill, their favorite part is the tall tower thing. So it's anecdotal, but my kids are really into the towers.
That was in my home.
Yeah.
So I teach in a bunch of the parks with kids and teaching them how to deal with the fear involved of being at height. And I think one of the things that we've noticed in the city with the new parks coming on is there is an element of height awareness that's really cool, but it's not super inclusive in terms of people being able to be at height that are not able to climb up there, which may be intentional. In terms of both at Lincoln and at Winter Hill, you have to be able to climb up there in order to be able to have that view. Whereas the tower and bridge one, you have an immediate access point to that height, which may be a factor. And I guess from my perspective, since I may have a different outlook on this, not as a parent, but as an instructor, that's something that I found really appealing. But maybe people might want to take that into account as you're looking at this, because you're putting people kind of 10, 13 feet off the ground, and they can just walk on there via the ramp.
I really appreciate you raising that point, because that actually greatly influenced how I voted on these plans. We have 2 older kids who are fine climbing the structures at Winter Hill and at Lincoln, and our 4-year-old is nowhere near that. And I'm thinking, for a 5 to 12-year-old play structure, next year she'll be at the Healey, and I know she'll be in the Tala for a while, but just going back there after school, the big gaps between the ropes and going up high, that's something that she's just not able to do. She's very petite, and so just keeping in mind, also as an adult, it's not always the easiest for us to get up there, but definitely for the kids to feel like they can play with their classmates and that they're not left out, and that they are able to reach those same points by an alternate means.
Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of that. I chose the platform and the bridge one because it has that slope. I don't know if you've been to the park. It's at the Spalding Rehab. I guess it's in Charlestown. But it has that great slope, and there's all those things built into the slope where you can climb up the slope using a ladder, and there are slides built into it for the kids who can't get up to these really, really high towers and slides. It's really...
Yeah, having the tower and the slope sounds like a win-win, right? Good. Well, we can talk about our next steps. Sure. There aren't any, because we're wrapping up at about an hour and a half. Any more questions before we wrap up? Yes?
Sorry, for question number 2. I know there wasn't anything about the adult fitness areas. And seeing as this is linked very closely with the housing development down here, I was just curious what elements would be included for kind of other generations to use.
And we didn't have options for that, really. I think we showed one example of it back here and what's common in both, right here. Yeah, this piece right here. But in the 3D views of each option, we had another image. Let me go to those for a second so you can see. Like this is an adult fitness element, and there's this frame component that supports various bars, for dips and chin-ups and for stretching. And what we're looking at is fitness that is not going to have any moving parts associated with it. So it won't have like the outdoor cycles or things that have presses to them, because of the maintenance associated with those and the potential for damage. These are all fixed bar type elements, but having a lot of different types of physical activity that you could do on them in a small footprint. Next steps are that we're going to take all of your feedback here and synthesize this information into a preferred site plan. And this is basically showing that we want to come back in late fall. We don't have a date set for that yet to present the preferred site plan, so you'll be able to see how we've interpreted your feedback. This information is also going to be shared on the city's website. The recording for this meeting will also be shared, so people who are not able to be here tonight are hopefully able to send your comments through. In this slideshow, there is also the contact information for Arne Franzen, and that is where you are to send any comments, feedback for this that can still get to us and be incorporated in the preferred option that would come back to you probably in about a month, I would think, right?
Hey, let's go back one slide to the schedule. So, everybody, I want to be really positive about the schedule, but that I don't have confirmation that we can proceed with this schedule right now. Our goal right now is get this design, get the best design that we can for this space. That design is going to dictate the budget. We will then work with the city council and the mayor's office to put the funding in place. Obviously, the funding is the key piece to this. And it's not a question of whether people support the project. You know, the mayor has said repeatedly that he really supports this project. He wants to push it forward. People in the city council have said the same thing. Jesse Klingon has, been adamant about this. It doesn't change the fact that the city has a lot of projects going on right now. So, high school, $50 million going into the Green Line, the West Branch Library, other parks and field projects going on. So we have to be careful about the scheduling of the funding. So as soon as we can get approval for the design, we're going to move ahead with the construction. It's a phased, I imagine it's going to be a phased project. The primary piece right now is the schoolyard. We want to get the schoolyard built as quickly as possible. When we've talked about this schedule, we've shown the schoolyard with the idea that the schoolyard construction could start, next spring and be happening over the summer. That is a possibility, but it has not been confirmed. So we will have this presentation, we'll have the video on the website, and we'll put, updates on that website as well. We have an email list of most everybody. If you haven't put your name in the sign-in sheet, please do that, so that if we want to put out an email blast on the schedule or any other aspect of the design, we can do that. So I really appreciate everybody coming out tonight.
Just one quick clarification. You said the schoolyard, does that include the top lots?
Yes.
Okay.
And if it doesn't happen in the spring, does that have to wait till the next spring?
It makes sense if you're doing schoolyard construction that you want to do it over the summer. You want to do it when there's the least amount of activity in that space. When we do the project, we'll be very careful to stage it as carefully as possible so that the kids always have a space to use. So we're looking at really a significant project that's going to cost many millions of dollars. So we're talking about, the largest schoolyard in the city. This is the largest schoolyard in the city. It's an amazing opportunity for us. We're just really happy to have this opportunity. A soccer field is going to be sort of like built out over the slope. The walls and the construction for that is a technical and expensive, puzzle that we've got to figure out. There's certainly a cost attached to that. Putting in the new ramp system on the slope is wonderful. We are going to do it. These things are going to happen. So we have that commitment. We just have to figure out how we can get the funding and when that comes in place.
Is the funding for the schoolyard tied to the field, or are they separate?
The funding is not in place right now. So
For procuring funds, is that something the city might consider doing separate from the field, or is it?
I would imagine the way I see things unfolding now is that the schoolyard happens first, right? We want to get that done, make it available to the kids, and get that done. And then I would imagine that the school, the soccer field and the ADA access to Mystic housing would be the second phase. And it makes sense to do that anyway, whether the funding is there or not, because you don't necessarily, there may be some cost savings to having one contractor do the whole thing, but you would still phase it so that you have a space for people to use the whole time. I think we've had a lot of really encouraging signals from the administration, and we're looking forward to moving forward as quickly as possible.
Thank you all for coming out and for spending the entire evening with us. Really appreciate your feedback. Hopefully we'll see you at the next meeting.
Thank you.